What's up guys, there is Cousin here. Welcome to the last useCallback tutorial you're ever gonna have to watch. Let's get into it. Alright, cool. So let's talk about useCallback. UseCallback is a hook that comes pre-built from React, but it's not a hook that you're gonna use all the time. You're certainly not gonna use it as often as useEffect or useState, for example, but I can guarantee you that you will use it. And the times that you're gonna use it, it's going to be very impactful for your performance. It can sometimes make or break your application in terms of performance. So it's very important. Make sure to watch until the end because we're gonna cover some very crucial topics to useCallback. So I have here a very simple application. You can see it here on the right. We have a list of users, we have a button to shuffle and an input to search for the users. The code looks like this. We have our list of users here, right? It's state. We're going to use useState. Then we have this handle search function, which all it does is it takes this list of users, which is the hard-coded list of users, which is also what we give to the state to initialize our state users. We take this list, we filter it, and then based off this text here, we're only going to return the user if it includes the text. Essentially, this is the feature right here. You type something, Alex, it's going to return only the users that have Alex in the name. This is pretty straightforward. It sets the users with this use state right here. Then this handle search function is being passed to this search component right here, which for now, we're going to look at it in just a moment, but ignore it for now. Then we have this shuffle button, which all it does is it just sets the user to shuffle. Shuffle, don't worry about it. It's just a function that just shuffles the array around. And you can see it right here. It just puts a different order to the users. We're going to use this to show you how this can impact the performance of your application. And finally, we are mapping over the list of users, right? So pretty simple. There's not that much to it. This is what we're working with. Cool. So now let's open up this search input component and see what this is. This, as you can see, is a pretty simple component. There's not that much more to it. It doesn't even have its own state. It just takes in an onChange function from the parent, which has a text parameter, and then it renders an input with a placeholder and then calls this onChange with the event and passes the value of the event to it. Right? Very, very simple. What I want you to look at is that it has memo here. It is exported wrapped in memo. Memo is not the topic of this video, but it is important to mention it because it kind of affects useCallback. Memo is a hook that is also used for performance reasons, and what it does is it wraps the component that you're trying to export, in this case search, and it intercepts the render of this component and it checks if the props are different from one render to the next. So what it will do is it will take the props of the search component, which in our case is just the onChange, and it will check if the onChange prop is different from the previous render to this render. If it is, it's going to re-render the component. If it isn't, it's going to skip rendering the component. This is something that you use for performance because some components you don't want to re-render them unless some of the props changes. And this is very important, right? So if this onChange is different, this is going to be re-rendered. If it's not different, it's not going to be rendered. So actually, to see this, we're going to add a console log to the search component to indicate to us when this component is going to be re-rendered and when it isn't. So let's do that. I'm going to do console.log and I'm going to say search rendered. Great. Make a bit of space here, right? Then we're going to go here, open up our console, go to console, clear everything and refresh and see what happens. So this is the first render of our component. You're going to see here that search is rendered, right? Which makes sense, right? This search here, which has this input, is rendered. It has to render at least once. That is how it works. If it didn't render, we wouldn't see the search input right here. Now, let's see what happens if I press this shuffle button right here. We've seen that this shuffle button, what it does is it'll shuffle this array of users and put them in a random order. But is it going to re-render our search component, right? I'll let you think about this for just a few seconds before I press it because it's not obvious, right? I mean, we did wrap this with useMemo, so it shouldn't re-render unless the props are different. So is it going to re-render? Well, let's see. I'm going to press shuffle. Our users are shuffled, but the search rendered, which is strange, right? I press shuffle again, the search re-rendered again. Why is this? Well, let's look at our code for a second, right? All that we really have is this handle search function, right? That's the only props that is being passed to search, and search is wrapped with memo. So technically, it shouldn't re-render, right? Because nothing really changed, or did it? See, this is the important part. We have to look at this handle search function because this is where the problem is. It's very important to know and understand that in React, functions are different on every render by default. It's not that the contents of the functions are different, right? This function doesn't change, right? It's running the same code every time. There's nothing in it that changes. It doesn't even use the user's state variable, which could change, right? It uses this hard-coded all users variable, which is static. This will never change across re-renders. But in React, functions, even if they have the same code, even if they're doing the same thing, they are going to be considered different on every render, which means if you do function equals function, it's going to return false. It's not going to return true, even if the function is the same and does the same thing. So then when you think about search, right, our search component here, which receives this handle search function on change, and then as we've seen, it has this memo here. Memo, what we'll do is it will go and check from the previous render this on change function, and then it will check is it equal or is it not equal to the new on change function of this render. And since in React functions are different on every render by default, that equality is going to be false, which means that the search is going to be re-rendered. So that's exactly what we see here, right? We click shuffle, it is re-rendered. We click shuffle, it is re-rendered because the onChange function, this handle search function, is different across re-renders. So that is our problem. That is the performance problem that we have because in this case, search is small, right? It's just rendering a component. So we don't really care about the fact that this is being re-rendered. But you can imagine that if you had a bigger component that did a lot more things, maybe had some code in there that was super expensive to run, or if that component rendered many subcomponents that each did their own thing, the sum of that could be very expensive. And you don't want to re-render this all the time when it's not needed, right? Because I mean, if you look here, do we really need to re-render the search? Because all we're doing is we're shuffling the users. The only area of concern that we have is this users array right here. We don't care about the search. The search does nothing to the users. It doesn't receive the users as state. It doesn't even manipulate the users on state, which is very important because although this handle search function will manipulate the users, from the search's perspective, it doesn't know what the function does. All it knows is that it receives an onChange function and it should call it with some text, and then this function will return nothing. It doesn't know about the inner workings of the actual onChange function, and that's good because that's the way it should be. This component is what you would call a dumb component. It shouldn't be aware of what the parent does. It doesn't need to. All it needs to know is that it has an input, and on change, it will call whatever the parent gives it with the value of the event. So when you look at all of that, then search doesn't need to be re-rendered when this shuffle button is pressed. So that is our problem. So now, how do we fix it? Well, that's the whole point of this video. We're going to use useCallback to fix it. useCallback is a hook that is meant to be specifically used for this purpose. What it does is it'll wrap your function and return to you a new function that is memoized, which means that is frozen. That will be identical across renders. We're going to use this, wrap this whole thing with useCallback, and you'll see how this will fix our problem. So let's do that. Let's go and import useCallback from React. Then we are going to copy this entire thing, and then we're going to do useCallback, open a parentheses, paste this entire thing, and then we're just going to go at the end and add the dependency array, and then we are going to save. What useCallback does is it takes a function, in this case it is this function right here, which is the same one that we had before. It wraps it and then it returns to you a new value that is identical, and then as the second parameter you can provide the dependency array, which allows you to control when this function should be different. So now our handle search is, again, it's a function, it does the same thing, it runs the same code, but it is memoized, it is frozen in time. It'll be the same, identical across renders. So now let's look at what happens when we save this, and then if we refresh and then we press the shuffle button again. We still have this search here that rendered once, right? Because again, this component has to render at least once. And now if I press shuffle, nothing is being logged. I press shuffle again, nothing is being logged, right? Which is what we want. This is how useCallback works. This function is identical across re-renders, which means that our search component is going to look through this memo here. It's going to look at onChange from the previous render, compare it to the one from this render, and it's going to see that they are identical. So there's no need to re-render this component again. Cool. So with this, we've now effectively solved our problem. We've managed to use useCallback for what it's used for and prevent an unnecessary re-render. And our application is now performant. Obviously, again, this is a super simple example, so the performance is really unnoticeable. But if you had a large example with many components, this would be very important. Now, before we finish this tutorial, I want to show you something that you have to be very careful with when using useCallback, because if you're not careful and you do this incorrectly, you're going to get some bugs in your application and you're not going to understand what happened or really what is going on. So let's say that instead of just filtering the users, I also want to log the first user in our list, right? That's the user right here. I want to just log this to the console before doing any filtering. So let's do that. Let's put a console log, and then we're going to do users 0, right? That's going to, without the 0, that's going to log the first user in our array. So let's do that. Now, we have a console here, nothing logged because this is on the search, right? So whenever this search is called, it's going to log the first user and it's going to put it here in the console. So what's going to happen if I start to press A? Right, I want to press A to filter for Alex, but this is going to run, this console log is going to run before we filter the users. So what really we should have in this console is we should have John, right? Because John is the first user, this code is going to come, it's going to log it, and then it's going to filter the users. So let's type A and see what we get to our console. A, we get John. As we expect, right? John was the first user, this code came, logged it, there's no problem there. But now, what if I press L to continue filtering for Alex, right? We should now have Alex that logs, because at this point in time, Alex is the first user, and what this code should do is it should log Alex because it is our first user before filtering the other users. So let's type L and see what we get. We type L and we have John again. Why? Because Alex was the first user. John isn't even in the list anymore. So where did this get John from? Well, this is the important thing that you absolutely have to understand with useCallback. Using useCallback is going to memoize the function, which we've said is going to freeze the function in time, but that also means that it's going to freeze everything in the function at a certain point in time. In our case, it's going to freeze it on the first render, right? So on the first render, we had John here. That was our first user in the array. So when we type A, it logs John as expected, but that function is still frozen. So from the point of view of the function, users still contains John. So even if I put L again, it's still going to log John because users is frozen at a specific point in time. This is how useCallback works, and it's very important to not to fall into this when using it, because you're going to get some unexpected behaviors and, as you can see, some obvious bugs. So how do we fix this? Well, that's where the dependency array comes into play. This little array right here. I've said that we're going to use this array to control when this function should be different, because we don't want to freeze it forever all the time. We want to control it and only change it, only update it when we want. And if you look at this dependency array right here, you're going to see that VS Code is being very helpful, and it's telling us that useCallback has a missing dependency, users, right? Because it's looking at our code. It's smart enough to go and look at our code and say, hey, you're using users in this function. Are you sure you don't want to put this in this dependency array? Because if you don't, you're going to get some unexpected behaviors, which is what we've been getting, right? And if you think about this from a logical perspective, we want this handle search to be different whenever users changes, because we are logging the users, the first user. So we want access to the most up-to-date users array so that we can log the most up-to-date user, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to add users to this array. And then with this, we are going to save, and then we are going to refresh, and then we're going to see how this behaves now. So let's type A again and see what is logged. We're going to have A. And then you see that John is still logged, which is fine. That is what we expect, right? John was the first user before we filtered. Then we have this search rendered, which again is normal because now we've given it users as the dependency array. Users is now different. It has updated values. And so this handle function is going to be different, which is going to cause this memo to consider it different from the previous render and re-render this search component. So this is totally what we expect. Now, if we type L, let's see what we get. We type L and now we have Alex, which is the correct value because Alex was the first element in the array before we filtered, and then our search has re-rendered. This is how useCallback is meant to be used. You're not supposed to freeze your function every time forever. That's not the way to approach this. In some cases, in some very rare cases, that is the approach to do. But oftentimes, if you're doing stuff with values, you're going to want to put them in the dependency array to always get the up-to-date values. Now, this is still performant. This still fixes our problem of performance. It's not because we have users here that it changes that now we get this search that is re-rendered, which is what we tried to prevent in the first place. Although that happened and we kind of did undo what we've tried to do in the first place, you can imagine that if we had a different piece of state here, whatever it would be, and that some other part of the component would update that piece of state, it would not change users. And so it would not change this handle search function and thus cause the search to be re-rendered. It's only happening now because we're dealing with the users directly. We've still solved our problem for everything else except users, which is what we want because we want to control when this is re-rendered and when it's not. And that is what you have to understand about useCallback. You should never freeze your functions forever. You should only freeze them until it's absolutely necessary and until you want them to change. So really keep this in mind and really try to wrap your head around useCallback because that is the way that it was designed to be used. So there you go. That was useCallback. I hope that by now you're able to go out and implement this, and I would actually strongly recommend that you do that. Work with it, play with it, add some console logs here and there because it's very important that you understand how this works fundamentally because you're going to have to use it in your applications and you're going to have to understand how it is used. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe because I'm going to be posting a lot more of these types of content and it really does help me out a lot. It shows me that you enjoy it and that you want more of these, so please do that. And yeah, my name has been Darius Kozlin. This is Kozlin Solutions and I will see you all in the next tutorial. Ciao, ciao.